We're on Nun Aleph, Amid Aleph. Let's restart from Rava Omar. The Gemara had said that the Chavite Kohen Gadol, which was the daily carbon brought by the Kohen Gadol, half of the Yissaron in the morning, half of the Yissaron in the afternoon. So the last thing the Gemara said is that it's Doicha Shabbos. It's even baked on Shabbos. And the Gemara offered a couple of reasons why. So Rava Omar al Machvas, it has to be baked on Shabbos because it has to be baked in a griddle. And the griddle is a kli shares, and if it's baked on Friday, to avoid chilul Shabbos, that means that it'll have been sanctified when it was baked in a kli shares, and then if you let it sit overnight, it's lina, it's already puzzle. Melamit shetuna kli, v'afale me'et malifsei belina, and therefore it has to be doicha Shabbos because you have no alternative of baking it the day before. That was Rava Shita. Again, if there's any questions, you let me know. So Tani Kavasi the Rava. So we have a brisa that backs up Rava. Now, the purpose of this brisa is just to say that the machvas is that it has to be baked on Shabbos because it can't be baked the day before because it has to be baked in a machvas, which is a kli shares, and therefore it'll be possibilina. That's the whole point of this brisa, and it's the first line. But once we quote the brisa, we have to figure out the entire brisa, and that's going to take us the entire amid. It's just trying to figure out this brisa. Tani Kavasi the Rava. Al machvas, the pasuk says regarding the chavitin that it should be on a griddle. Melamed shetuna kli, which means it has to be baked in a kli shares. And therefore, as we said before, if it's baked the day before, it'll be lina. Okay, ad kan. But now that we mentioned the brisa, let's finish the brisa. Now this chavitin, it had oil as well. And the pasuk says bashemen. The pasuk says that it cooked with oil. Now the Gemara understands that to be unnecessary because if it's in a griddle, it has to be used oil. That's how you cook in a griddle. You use oil. So the pasuk bashemen, the extra word bashemen, is lahoisif lashemen. It's to tell you that it's more than the usual amount. Meaning, the standard optional mincha is 1 lug of oil. This is more than that. Lahoisif lashemen. Now, eini yedea kama. I understand it's supposed to be more than 1 lug, but I don't know how much. So, what we're going to try to figure out is how much oil is added to these chavitin. So, Nemar kan shemen, it says the word shemen over here, and Nemar lahalon b'minchas nesachim shemen, and it says the word shemen regarding the minchas nesachim. The minchas nesachim is the standard mincha that comes with karbanos. Make it easy. Let's talk about the carbon tamid. The carbon tamid had a mincha that went along with it. It says the word shemen by both. Malalon shloisha lugin liisaron. Just like when it comes to the standard tamid, it's 3 lug. Afkan shloisha lugin liisaron. When you donate a mincha, it's 1 lug. But it says bashemen, that means it's more than 1 lug. How much? So it says the word bashemen over here. It says the word bashemen by the tamid, and by the tamid it's 3 lug. So over here it's 3 lug. Good, 3 lug. Says the Gemara, kelach derech zu. Or perhaps I would make the argument, no, nemar kan shemen, v'nemar b'minchas nedava shemen. It says the word shemen over here, and it says the word shemen by an optional mincha that you donate. Malalon lug echad afkan lug echad. Just like by the optional one, it's 1 lug. So over here it's 1 lug. So maybe it's only 1 lug. Now pause. There is an obvious question here, and that is, the way I described the brisa to you, I know that there's oil, yeah? If I don't know anything, I would assume it's 1 lug, because that's the minimum. The word bashemen is superfluous, it's extra to tell me more than 1 lug. So then the Gemara says, well, how much oil? So it says the word shemen over here, it says the word shemen by the tamid, just like the tamid is 3, so over here it's 3. Says the Gemara, or perhaps, no, maybe it's 1 lug. Okay, there's an obvious problem. The problem is, the whole word bashemen is to tell me it's more than 1 lug. It's got to be more than 1 lug. I know it could be a lug. That's how I started this conversation. It could be a lug. But the word bashemen is extra to tell me it's more. So how much is more than a lug? So the Gemara says 3 lug. Then the Gemara says, no, maybe it's 1 lug. We know it's more than a lug. That's the Gemara is going to deal with. The Gemara is going to address that question. But b'kitzer, maybe it's a lug. So do I compare? I have the chavitin. That's the question mark. I have 2 things that I could draw it to. I could draw it to the tamid, which is 3 lug, or I can draw it to an optional mincha, which is 1 lug. Well, near l'mi daima. Let's see which is it more comparable to. Done in tashat, me tashat. Take out the base. So you could say it's more comparable to the tamid because they're similar in 3 ways. Tashat, which is tadir, right? The tamid is every day. The chavitin is every day. Doicha Shabbos, both are Doicha Shabbos, and Doicha Tuma, both are brought in a state of Tuma. So that's a similarity between the chavitin and the standard tamid. Just like the tamid is 3 lug, so over here it's 3 lug. Ein done tashat, mishein tashat. So it's more comparable in those 3 ways. Says the Gemara, okay, a kelch derech zu. done in yagel meyagel. Yeah, but it's also comparable to the optional mincha. The chavitin are comparable to the optional mincha in 3 ways. The optional mincha is 1 lug. What is it comparable to the optional mincha? First of all, to yachid. An optional mincha means I show up to the Beis HaMikdash. I just want to bring a carbon mincha. This is kain gadol, individual. The tamid is communal. Secondly, biglal atzma, it's brought on its own. The chavitin was a standalone mincha. It didn't come with an animal. An optional mincha is a standalone mincha. The tamid is a mincha that's associated with the animal. So in that way, it's also more comparable to the optional one than the tamid. And the last one is levina. The tamid mincha does not have levina. This does. Okay, so in 3 ways it's comparable. So I got 3 ways this way, I got 3 ways that way. Landlocked, I don't know how much oil. So you have 2 different approaches amongst the Tanoim. Rav Yishmael ben Eish Rav Yechim ben Broika Omer, he says, I'll tell you how I know it's comparable to the tamid. It says, Soilas mincha tamid. It says the word tamid. Harehi loch keminchas tamid. That means the chavitin, it says the word tamid, that means it's telling you it's like the carbon tamid. Ma minchas tamidim shleisha lugan lisar, and afzu shleisha lugan lisar. And just like the mincha of tamid is the mincha of the tamid has 3 lug of oil, so to this is 3 lug. That's Rav Yishmael's take. Rav Shimon Omer, Rav Shimon says, I'll tell you how I know. Riba kan shemen. I know over here it's supposed to be more than a lug. The riba b'minchas kvasim shemen, and I know by the tamid it's more than a lug. So malalon shleika shalugin lisar and afkan shalugin lisar. Meaning Rav Shimon is more coming from like I know it's got to be more than a lug. So because that's the standard, and it says the word shemen, which is more than that. So if it's more than that, I'll go to the tamid, which is 3. So says the Gemara. Well, akelcha derech zu riba kan shemen b'riba b'minchas parim ve'elim shemen. Just a quick question to Rav Shimon. Your whole thing is that it's got to be more than a lug, so you go to the tamid, not based on a pasuk, just based on a svara. Well, there are karbanos like a shlomim. The mincha that comes with a shlomim of a par or with a par is 2 lug. So I get it's got to be more than a lug, but why are you jumping all the way to a tamid, which is 3, go to a par, which is 2? So near limidoma. So says the Gemara, well, which is it more comparable to? Done in mincha ba isaron, mincha ba isaron. Then done in mincha ba isaron, mincha ba shnayim b'shlosh isaron. I'll tell you why. Says Rav Shimon, it's more comparable to a tamid is because the tamid has 1 isaron of flour, and this one also does, as opposed to the, let's say, a shlomim, which has 2 isaron of flour. Okay, fine. So you have these 2 different approaches. They both conclude the same thing, which is that the chavitin has more than a lug of oil, and it's comparable to the tamid mincha, which is 3 lug. The Gemara then mentions the question that I said before, which is the flow of the Bryce is a little bit off. The Bryce starts off by saying that the word bashemen means that it's more than the standard. The standard is 1 lug, this is more than that, it's extra. Says the Gemara, well, how much? So the Gemara says, well, probably 3. Then the Gemara says, or perhaps, no, it should be like the standard mincha. The obvious question is, the word bashemen is extra to tell me it's not like the standard mincha. I already know it's not like the standard mincha. Why do you have to mention this? Says the Gemara, Hagufa kasha. The Bryce itself contradicts itself. Amrit bashemen lahaisel l'shemen. You start off with the premise that the word bashemen means it's extra. The whole word bashemen, I can figure it out without bashemen, because I know it's a machvas, which means it has oil. So the word bashemen is extra. It's extra to tell me more than a lug. And then the Gemara in its discussion says maybe a lug. It doesn't make any sense. How did Tani, Nemar kan shemen, Nemar minchas ledava shemen. It's a pella. So says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi, a couple answers. Abaye says, Man tana b'shemen lahoisif, Rav Shimon he. Uman ubedina man kahada Rav Yishmael. You know what he says? This brisa was not authored by one person. If it was authored by one person, the back and forth, I get the problem. It's a confusing flow if it's authored by one person. It's not. If you remember in the brisa, Rav Yishmael and Rav Shimon both come to the conclusion that the minchas chavitin has 3 lug of oil, but Rav Yishmael comes to the conclusion based on a pasuk. Rav Shimon comes to the conclusion because the word bashemen means extra. When the Brisa start off by saying bashemen is extra, that was Rav Shimon talking. The next paragraph when it said maybe it's 1 lug, that was Rav Yishmael talking. It was not authored by the same person. Rav Shimon is the one who believes the word bashemen is extra, so he said that in the beginning. Then when the Brisa said maybe it's 1 lug, that was not authored by the same person. Okay, just one thing to remember, that's the first answer. Rav Shimon is the one who believes that the word bashemen is telling me it's more. Rav Yishmael doesn't necessarily know that. Rav Yishmael says, like, the word bashemen just tells me there's oil. Maybe the word bashemen is to tell me that it's not like a sinner's mincha that has no oil. So the question is, what does the word bashemen teach you? Rav Yishmael says, it just teaches me the oil. Rav Shimon says, no, I know there's oil from a svara, just rationally. Bashemen is telling me there's more oil. So that Brisa that started off by saying that there's more oil, that was Rav Shimon. And then when the Brisa said maybe Maybe it's just a standard lug mincha. That was Rabbi Shmuel talking. Okay. Now, we'll do this next part a little quickly. It's just in drushes. Rav Huna breder Rabbi Shua Amar Kula Rabbi Shmuel ben Asher Breikeri. Rav Huna says I could read the entire brisa with the Chasure Mechsere. You have to add some words, but I could read the entire brisa as really authored by Rabbi Shmuel. Again, Rabbi Shmuel believes that the word Bashemen is not telling me more than a lug; it's just telling me there's oil. Knowing that, if you add some words, this is the flow of the brisa. The brisa should be read as follows: Hachi Kamar Bashemen lo Haisef Lashemen. This is Rabbi Shmuel sort of thinking this out. Does the word Bashemen mean more than a lug of oil? Let's assume that Bashem means extra. Why? Because I know there's oil. Kiven dechsiv ba'al machvas. Kiminchas machvas dami. I know that machvas means that it has to have oil. So Bashemen is extra. Then Rabbi Shmuel said, no. He's like speaking it out. Maybe then Rabbi Shmuel says, you know what? I take it back. Maybe Bashemen is not actually telling me more oil. Maybe Bashemen is just telling me there is oil. So this flow of the back and forth was Rabbi Shmuel just sort of speaking it out. He's saying, I think Bashemen means there's extra oil. Then he's like, actually, you know what? Bashemen just might be there's oil. It might be just a lug. Then he says, because I could argue, says Rabbi Shmuel, maybe the reason why you need the word Bashemen, if I know there's oil, then the word Bashemen is extra. But then Rabbi Shmuel said, maybe I need the word Bashem just to tell me there is oil. Why? Because maybe it's like a sinner's mincha. Sinner's mincha doesn't have any oil. The word Bashem just tells me there is oil. But now it could be a lug. And then Hadar Amar Tahavinami L'Kvay L'Shemen Teisi Medina. Then he tried to figure out, well, is it one lug? Is it three lug? V'dain Dina V'Le'Asilev Itzer Cross Els Minchatomik and Mesam Rishmal. And then he said, well, now that I'm not sure, pasuk. That at least explains the back and forth. He at first thought that Bashemen was extra, then he said, actually, I think you just need the word Bashem, just tell me there's oil, because maybe it's like a sinner's mincha that has no oil. To that, I'm not sure, pasuk, that it's like the Talmud. Rabbi does the same thing with Rav Shimon. Rav Shimon believes the word Bashemen is extra, but he also went through this back and forth. Kula Rav Shimon. V'iloi nemar kamer, and this is how you're supposed to read it. Hachi kamer. Bashemen lo haisav l'Shemen. The word Bashem is really to add. Because even without the word Bashemen, I know that there has oil because it says al machvas, ki machvas damya. And then he says the truth is, even without the word Bashemen, Rabbi Shimon's not confused. Rabbi Shimon is saying, the word Bashemen is extra. I'll tell you why, because I already know it. And then he says, and even without the word Bashemen, I could still figure out it's more than a lug. The dain dina le'asile. He tried to come to that conclusion, meaning Rav Shimon was basically saying, Rav Shimon ends off by saying the word Bashemen just tells me it's more, which is three. The back and forth is he was trying to get to that conclusion that it's three without the word Bashemen. Then maybe even without the word Bashemen, I could come to the conclusion it's three. He couldn't. That's why he needed the word Bashemen. So this back and forth was never thinking that it would be irregular. He was just trying to figure out whether you need the word Bashemen to get me to that conclusion, or can I do that on my own? He says, "V'itzrach Bashemen, Hadar Amar Teisi Keminchas Parim Ve'elim, Hadar Amar Done." Go to the next page, Minchas Hababis Yaron, and that was the conclusion. Okay, if you do it again, it works. Okay, the Mishnah had previously said that the Kohen Gadol brings a fully saron from his house. He splits it in half. He does a half in the morning, a half in the afternoon. Then the Mishnah says, what if he dies? So we said in the previous Mishnah, if he dies, the second half is brought by the second Kohen Gadol, who they replaced him with. Now, if you remember, we said, though, that the second Kohen Gadol cannot just bring half from home, because it says, machatzis. The extra vav tells me that it has to be a whole. So he brings a whole from home, only uses half, and the extra half that he had, and the half from the first Kohen Gadol, is just destroyed. That was the previous Mishnah. Now that's assuming that very day that the Kohen Gadol died, they replaced him with a new Kohen Gadol. What if they didn't? What if the Kohen Gadol dies, and that day they couldn't find the replacement? So what do they do with that afternoon? Who brings the Kohen Gadol's mincha, chavitin, the daily chavitin, if there is no Kohen Gadol? So says the Mishnah, Loi minu Kohen acher tachtav, if they did not appoint another Kohen Gadol in his place. So Mishel Mihaisa, who would pay? Whose funds? Because the Kohen Gadol would always bring it from home. That was one of the halachas that the Kohen Gadol supplies, as we'll see in a moment. It's based on psukim, that there are special psukim that basically say two things. I'll just sort of say this outside. There are two times that minchas chavitin are brought. Daily by the Kohen Gadol, and every time a Kohen is inaugurated. Every time I'm a random Kohen. My first time in the base of Mikdash, I bring a chavitin, day one. So it's brought by a regular Kohen and the Kohen Gadol daily. Now the Kohen Gadol daily, because the pasuk says Aaron ubanav, Aaron had to bring it himself. He had to pay for it himself. He brought it from home. So the question is, if the Kohen Gadol dies and they didn't appoint a replacement, who pays for the chavitin after the afternoon chavitin? So it's a machlekes tanoim. Rav Shimon oimer mishal tzibor, Rav Yehuda oimer mishal yarshim. Rav Shimon says it's brought from the communal funds from the public, and Rav Yehuda says no, it's the family of the deceased Kohen Gadol. They go to the Kohen Gadol's kids, and they say, we're going to take from your estate to pay for the Kohen Gadol, to pay for the chavitin of the Kohen Gadol. Should remind me after daf. I have to give some matanos l'vyanim. Someone sent me the money. I forgot. Okay. Ushleima haisa kreva. And one other halacha is that when it was brought by someone who's not the Kohen Gadol, it's brought whole. Meaning, it's dafka the Kohen Gadol who splits it in half. If let's say the Kohen Gadol dies and they take the money from his yarshim, they don't bring a half in the afternoon. They bring a whole and they burn a whole. The whole concept of taking an isaron and splitting and burning half at a time, that's only if it's the Kohen Gadol. If it's being brought by the replacement, by the Yarshim or the public, it's burnt whole. It's burnt fully. Okay. Tan Rabbanon, Kohen Gadol Shemes. The Brisa speaks out these opinions. Kohen Gadol Shemes, Kohen Achatachtav. Kohen Gadol dies, and they did not yet appoint a replacement. Menayin shetehei minchasai kreva mishal yarshim. How do I know that the yarshim pay for it? This is obviously the opinion of Rav Yehuda. Tamaloymar vehakoyhein hamashiach tachtav mibonav yasa osa. The pasuk says vehakoyhein hamashiach tachtav. Tachtav means in his place mibonav yasa osa, from his kids. So it's pretty clear. The pasuk saying that the kids pay for it. Now, Yachol Yakrivenu Chatzoim. You might think that if they're taking the funds from the children, they should bring halves like their father did. No, Tamaloimer Oisa. Oisa means fully. Kula v'lechatzi. They burn an entire Isaron, not a half of Isaron. Div Rav Yehuda. Rav Shimon Oimer. Rav Shimon says no, it's actually paid for by the community. How do I know? Chok Oilam. Chok Oilam means that it has Mishel Oilam. It has to come from the Oilam. The Oilam means the whole community, the whole world. All of Klal Yisrael's Oilam. And how do I know that it's burnt entirely? He agrees, but he has a different pasuk. It's kolul tiktar, shetei kula baktar. Kolul means it's entirely burnt. So they both have their own psukim. Obviously, they each have to deal with the other people's psukim. Now, before we get to them dealing with each other's psukim, we're going to have the following question, which is Rav Yehuda says that it's paid for by the children because the pasuk says hakohen hamashiach tachtav mibonav yasa oso. That he reads it that if the kohen were to die, it's mibonav. The problem is, is that what the pasuk is coming to tell me? I thought the problem is the Bryce is actually going to tell me that this pasuk tells us the following. When the pasuk addresses Aaron, you might think that it's dafka Aaron. How do I know that it teaches future kehanim gedolim as well? It's kohen hamashiach tachta mibonav yasa osa. So we're going to have a Bryce that basically says it's not talking about a case of Kohen Gadol dies. It's telling me that future Kehanim Gedolim also do the daily Chavitin, and not just Aaron HaKoyin. All future Kehanim Gedolim is Mibanov, his children also. So how could you tell me two things from the same pasuk? What does the Brisa say? Zeh karban Aaron ubanov asher yakrivu laHashem biyom himashachos. So this is the karban of Aaron and his sons on the day of the inauguration. Now Yochli Aaron ubanov makrivin karban echad. You might think that the day of the inauguration, Aaron and his children should bring the karban. What does this mean? It means that you might think it only applies dafka to the day of inauguration, not to future Kehanim Gedolim and not to future Kehanim that are inaugurated later on. I told you, this Chavitin is brought twice, daily by the Kohen Gadol, and every time a future Kohen is inaugurated. Now you might think just from the pasuk, maybe it was only applied to Aaron and his children on the day of the original inauguration, but future personal inaugurations, meaning my first time in the Beis HaMikdash, maybe there is no karban. Tamaloi Mashi Yakrivu LaHashem. Yakrivu means they bring it forever. Aaron b'fnei atzma, ban b'fnei atzma. Aaron brings it forever, the Kohen Gadol, and the children whenever they're inaugurated. Banav, elu kehanim edyotis. And Banav tells me that it's not just kehanim gedolim that are inaugurated, regular kehanim as well. Perhaps it means that only when the inauguration of future Kahanim Gedolim, how do I know that every standard Kohen brings it on his first day in the Beis HaMikdash? HaKohen HaMashiach Tachtav tells me not just Aaron HaKohen, but future Kahanim Gedolim as well. So Kohen HaMashiach Tachtav tells me that it doesn't just apply to Aaron HaKohen, it applies to every future Kohen Gadol, he brings it daily. And the word Bonav tells me that every future Kohen on his day of inauguration. So you see that the word Kohen HaMashiach Bonav Tachtav Bonav is telling me that it applies to future Kahanim Gedolim, not just Aaron. So how could I have two things from the same pasuk? Brisa says it's telling me that it applies to future Kahanim Gedolim, but Rav Yehuda says that it's telling me that if the Kohen were to die, you take the funds from his kids. How could you say both in the same pasuk? So Gemara answers, Im Kain. The truth is, Rav Yehuda would tell you I can learn out both, because if the entire purpose of the pasuk was to tell me that the heirs, that the Yarshim pay for the Chavitin in case that he dies and they didn't replace in that day, Lichtev Kra HaKohen HaMashiach Tachtav Bonav Yasa. My Mibonov, the extra mem, is Shamina Tarti. The extra mem is to tell you both. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we're going to figure out how do they all deal with each other. Rav Shimon, Hai Oisa my Avidli. What does Rav Shimon do with Oisa? Because Oisa, the pasuk says before, is Rav Yehuda's way of telling me that you burn it entirely when the Kohen Gadol does not bring it. Let's say it's brought from his Yarshim, Oisa means it's entirely burnt. Rav Shimon learns that out from Kalil Tiktar. So what does he do with Oisa? The Kohen Gadol shemeis umina acher tachtav shalayavi chatzi isar mebeisov lo chatzi isar shal rishon. Rav Shimon actually uses this to tell you the halacha from the previous Mishnah. I told you in the previous Mishnah, if the Kohen Gadol A were to die in the middle of the day, and they were to appoint a Kohen Gadol B does not just bring half of an isaron from home, he has to bring a full isaron, split it in half, and only use half. How do you know that? So I told you yesterday, we learned it out from the extra vav. Rav Shimon learns it out from Osa. Says the Gemara, the tepek min umachatzisa. Why doesn't he like yesterday's drush umachatzisa? The answer is vav le darsh. Shimon doesn't darsh in the vav. Okay. Rav Yehuda haychak olam ayavle. What does Rav Yehuda do with chak olam? Because chak olam is what Rav Shimon says it has to come from the olam, that it's paid for by the community, not the children. So what does Rav Yehuda do with that? Because he thinks that it's paid for by the yarshim. Chuk al olam tehei. Chak olam just tells me that it's a future, it's a chak. It's done daily, forever. Meaning, this was not a one-time carbon by Aaron HaKohen, this was a chak olam, it's a forever. Kalil tikter lamali. What does Rav Yehuda do with kalil tikter? Because he says that it's entirely burnt when it's not brought by the Kohen Gadol from Oisa. What does he do with kalil tikter? Mebaila the kidetanya. It's coming from the following brisa. I'll say it outside, we'll see it inside. The brisa basically says there were two different karbanos, chavitin. One is the daily Kohen Gadol, and one is the inauguration of the Kohen. Now, apparently, the flow of the psukim it's not complicated, the flow of the psukim is that it says that, and they're both burnt entirely, they're not eaten. By the Kohen Gadol, it says burnt entirely. And by the by the inauguration of the Kohen, regular Kohen, there's a lav of eating it. So by the Kohen Gadol, it says it has to be burnt entirely, but there's no lav. By the regular Kohen's inauguration, there's a lav of eating it, but it doesn't say it's burnt entirely. So how do I know that basically both halachas apply? The Kohen Gadol burnt entirely and there's a lav. The regular Kohen inauguration burnt entirely and there's a lav. How do I know this? That's the drasha. I only know that the Kohen Gadol it has to be entirely burnt. And there's a lav not to eat it by the regular inauguration of the Kohen. How do I know that the halachas apply to each other? That the Kohen Gadol, there's a lav and there's a chiyuv to burn it. And the regular hedyot, there's a lav, and there's a chiyuv to burn it. Tamalemer kolul gzerish shava. Nemer kan kol, it says that we're called by the Kohen Gadol. Venemer lalon kolul, and it says that we're called by the Kohen hedyot. Makan bol betikter, afkan mekol tikter, malalon litin loisei elchi losei, afkan litin loisei bachi losei. Good. One last sugya. The Gemara says, now, the Mishnah had said that if the Kohen Gadol dies, the Chavitin are brought, and according to Rav Shimon, it's brought from the Tzibor, because it says Chok Olam, that the funds the Tzibor pays for, and it's Chok Olam. Now that Chok Olam is a pasuk. That means that it's a Chiyav Deraisa that the Tzibor pays for it. Meaning, when I say Tzibor, I mean it's taken from the Machzah Shekel funds, the communal funds. V'savar Rav Shimon, Mishal Tzibor Deraisa, does Rav Shimon say that it's taka deraisa, that it's paid for by the tzibor? V'hatzanan. The Mishnah says, Amr of Shimon, Shiva Dvarim Heskinu Bezdin. There are 7 institutions of Bezdin. V'zeh echon mehem. And this is one of them. One of them is that it's paid for by the tzibur. So stop. This brayso says it's paid for by the tzibur, but it says Takonas Bezdin, not a pasuk. So which one is it? Now we'll just see it. One of them, I don't know why, the Mishnah doesn't list all of them. But the Mishnah says, if a guy sent his oila from abroad, the halach is that a guy is able to send the carbon as long as it's it's an oila and it's entirely no mumen. Now let's say he sends the carbon and he sends the nesachim along with it, the libations are with it, krivim mishaloi. Then the nesachim are brought with it. Vim lav, but let's say he didn't send the nesachim, he just sent the oila, but the oila requires nesachim to come with it. So what do you do with the nesachim? You can't bring the oila as is, but he didn't send the nesachim. So what do I do? Then krevim mishal tzibur. Takonas chazal is that the tzibur pays for it. Okay. Good. That's one takana. Another takana, v'chen ger shemeis v'nichus v'achim. If a ger dies and he left animals to be brought as a carbon. So yesh lo nesachim, if he left enough money for the nesachim, krev mishaloi, they use his funds, his estate to pay for the nesachim. V'im lav, krev mishal tzibur. And if he did not leave enough money, then the tzibur pays for it. Again, this is not important, but the last one is important. U'tnai bezdin, and it's a stipulation of bezdin, kohen gadol shameis, that if a kohen gadol were to die, v'lo yiminu kohen acher tachtav, and they did not appoint a kohen that day, shetei minchasei krev mishal tzibur, that the chavit in that afternoon is brought from the tzibur. So the kasha is, or Shimon had a pasuk chak oilam, which is deraisa. This is a takonas bezdin. So how do you reconcile this? We'll end with this. Amar avavo shnei takonas have. The truth is there were 2 takonas. The 2 takonas are, it originally was deraisa. Originally they started with a drasha that it's deraisa from the tzibur, like chak oilam. However, when they saw that it was too much financially, it was too difficult on the lishka, that the tzibur couldn't afford it, then takinu milgabi yarshim. They Chazal enacted that he should pay for, that the children should pay for it. So it's deraisa chak oilam. But then takonas Chazal is that it was too difficult for the tzibur to pay, so they put the financial burden on his family. Then, Kivin the chazdika pashile, but then they saw that the family was negligent in paying for it, they couldn't get them to pay for it. Ukma aderaisa, takonas Chazal was to go back to the pasuk. So the answer is, one with this, it's both. It's deraisa and a takana. Because originally it's really deraisa, but they originally changed the takana that the family should pay for it. But then they saw that wasn't working, so the second takana is let's go back to the Torah. All right, we'll stop here.